My husband secretly banished his heavily pregnant wife to a freezing car for 35 nights so he could sleep for his promotion. Then his own mother caught me shivering in the back seat, marched upstairs, and accidentally exposed a financial web of deceit that would leave him utterly ruined, facing fraud charges and working a cash register. 8 months pregnant and banished to the car every night because my husband could not stand my tossing. That was my reality until his own mother caught me freezing and made him pay for every single sleepless night. The seatbelt buckle dug into my swollen belly as I curled sideways across the back seat of my Toyota Corolla. I was 8 months pregnant, and the dashboard clock read 3:14 in the morning. The digital temperature display read 34 degrees outside, and the interior of the car wasn't holding much more warmth than that. I pulled the thin gray fleece blanket higher over my shoulder. It was the same blanket I kept folded in my trunk now, sitting right next to a spare phone charger, a half-empty bottle of water, and a stale granola bar. I never had the appetite to eat. I had a system. 35 nights of practice will do that to a person. The baby kicked hard against my ribs, right where the seatbelt dug in, like she knew I was miserable and wanted me to know she was entirely aware of it too. I pressed my palm flat against the cold fabric of my maternity shirt and whispered to the dark car, "I know, baby. Almost morning." But it wasn't almost morning. It was barely past 3. 2 hours earlier, Mark had handed me my keys the exact same way he always did, standing in the doorway of our bedroom in his sweatpants, not quite making eye contact with me. "You're tossing too much," he had said, his voice laced with that practiced, exhausted annoyance. "I've got the VP pitch for the Harrison account tomorrow. I need my sleep, Chloe. You know how important this is." I didn't argue. I hadn't argued in over a month. Arguing took energy, and I was 8 months pregnant and exhausted in a way that lived deep inside my bones, a kind of fatigue that makes your vision blur at the edges. Some nights, it was just easier to take the cold metal keys and walk down 3 flights of stairs to the apartment parking lot than to have the exact same circular conversation again. "I'll text you when you can come back up," he had said, already turning his back to me and walking toward our warm, comfortable bed. I sat in my car, turned on the engine just long enough to run the heater for 10 minutes, and listened to an audiobook at the lowest possible volume. It was the kind of background noise that kept me from thinking too hard about where I was, why I was there, and what kind of woman allows herself to be treated this way. 50 minutes into the darkness, my phone buzzed. I thought maybe it was early, maybe he felt guilty. It wasn't. It was Sarah, my older sister, sending a photo of her cat knocking over a plant. She was awake because she worked night shifts at the hospital, and she had no idea what my life had become. I didn't answer her. I didn't want her asking why I was awake, because then I would have to lie, and I was so deeply, completely tired of lying. At my last checkup, doctor. Vance had frowned at the blood pressure cuff, tapped the gauge, and then stared directly at me. "Chloe, this is 145/95. This is dangerously elevated. Something is keeping you from resting. I need to know exactly what it is." I had lied to her face. I told her I was just anxious about the baby. Normal new parent jitters. She hadn't looked convinced, and I hadn't expected her to be. By 4 in the morning, my hips had gone completely numb from the awkward angle I was folded into across the back seat. I climbed heavily into the front passenger seat instead, reclining it as far back as the lever would allow, which still put me at an angle no heavily pregnant body should ever have to endure. I stared at the ceiling of my Corolla, at a small water stain I'd never managed to clean, and I thought about the nursery 3 floors above me. It had soft, green walls, a crib we hadn't bothered to assemble yet, and a husband who was, at that exact moment, sleeping soundly in a bed I was no longer allowed to occupy. At 6:45 a.m., my phone buzzed on the dashboard. 4 words, the exact same 4 words every single morning. "You can come back up." "No, good morning." "No, I'm sorry. Just permission." Delivered like I was a stray dog, he had finally decided to let back inside the house. I didn't know yet that in just a few weeks, this freezing asphalt parking lot would be the exact reason my husband lost his lucrative career, his mother's trust, and every single cent he had spent years secretly hoarding. That night, I only knew I was freezing cold. My spine ached, and no one was coming to save me. I climbed the 3 flights of concrete stairs by myself, letting myself back inside, exactly like I had been instructed. I want to be perfectly honest about something, because the version of this story where I am simply a naive victim isn't the whole truth. I let this happen. I was 28 years old, married to Mark for 3 years, and together with him for 5. We had met at a mutual friend's rooftop party in Seattle back when I was an administrative assistant at a logistics firm, and he was a rising star at a mid-sized marketing agency in Bellevue. He had made me laugh within the first 10 minutes of meeting him, and he possessed the kind of effortless confidence that filled up a room without stepping on anyone else's toes. We got married 2 years later at a beautiful, small venue overlooking the water. His mother, Barbara, insisted on paying for the catering because she wanted us to start our lives without debt. Barbara was a widow. Mark's father had passed away from a sudden stroke when Mark was 22, and Barbara had raised Mark and his younger brother, Julian, mostly on her own after that. She doted on Mark in that specific, intense way mothers sometimes do with the child, who reminds them most of the husband they lost. I adored Barbara from the start. She was a no-nonsense, pragmatic woman who would tell you if you had spinach in your teeth instead of letting you embarrass yourself. Looking back, I can easily find the exact seam where my marriage started to fray, even though at the time it just looked like ordinary financial stress. Mark and I moved into a 2-bedroom apartment in Capitol Hill shortly after the wedding. The rent was steep, but Mark insisted he could handle the budget. He was better with numbers, he constantly reminded me. I trusted him completely, maybe a little carelessly. A year into our marriage, Mark started giving me what he called our monthly household stipend. He would deposit exactly $500 into my personal checking account on the first of every month for groceries and personal items, while he handled the rent, utilities, and investments directly from a joint account I technically had access to but never looked at because he held all the passwords. When I asked to see the full budget once, he laughed, kissed my forehead, and said, "Chloe, you hate spreadsheets. Let me handle the stress of the numbers. You just focus on making this place a home." I told myself it was a healthy division of labor. It wasn't. It was a wall being built brick by brick. When I got pregnant, things were wonderful for about 2 months. Mark cried real tears when he saw the ultrasound. But around the end of my second trimester, his manager announced a VP position was opening up. Mark talked about this promotion like it was a matter of life and death. The extra title meant a massive raise, and he started using the phrase, "This is for the baby's future," to justify his growing obsession with work. That was exactly when the sleep complaints started. It arrived in small, calculated steps. Step 1. He said my tossing was waking him up and asked if I could take the couch just for the week of a big presentation. I agreed. Step 2. The couch was too close to the bedroom, and he could hear the cushions squeaking when I got up to use the bathroom. He bought earplugs, claimed they didn't work, and bought an air mattress for the living room. Step 3. The air mattress deflating slightly in the night made a noise that got into his head. We had a massive argument. He looked at me, exhausted and furious, and said, "Honestly, at this point, it might just be easier if you slept in the car tonight. It's insulated. It's quiet. Just for tonight, Chloe. If I don't get this VP spot, we don't get the house fund. We don't get the nursery furniture. I'm doing this for our daughter." He weaponized my guilt perfectly. I apologized for keeping him awake. I actually apologized. And by early November, the car had become the default. I was sleeping in a parking lot 35 nights in a row, convinced I was making a noble sacrifice for my family's future. Update 1. The absolute breaking point didn't come from me. It came from Barbara. It was a Tuesday night, 36 weeks into my pregnancy, and the temperature had dropped to a bitter 34 degrees. Barbara had driven across town unannounced because she had found a specialized maternity support pillow on sale and wanted to leave it on our doorstep as a surprise. She let herself into the resident parking lot using the gate code Mark had given her months ago. She told me later that she almost drove right past my car, but she recognized the faded bumper sticker on my Corolla and slowed down. She saw me curled in the front seat, a thin blanket pulled up to my chin, shivering so violently that my teeth were audibly chattering. She knocked hard on the glass. I startled awake, completely disoriented, and rolled the window down a few inches, instantly flushed with deep humiliation. "Chloe?" Her voice was flat, terrified. "Why in God's name are you sleeping out here in the freezing cold?" I don't know what exactly broke inside of me in that moment, but the dam completely shattered. Maybe it was the sheer exhaustion, or the fact that I was 36 weeks pregnant and physically in agony. I told her everything. I told her about the couch, the air mattress, the noise complaints, the VP promotion, the 4-word texts every morning, and the $500 monthly budget. I sobbed uncontrollably, my breath pluming in the freezing air. Barbara stood outside my car door for 10 solid minutes, not moving a single muscle, her face draining of all color until she looked like a ghost. When I finally stopped talking, she didn't say a single word. She turned around, got into her SUV, and drove away. For one agonizing second, I thought I had embarrassed myself so deeply that she had abandoned me. But she returned 20 minutes later. She had driven to an all-night superstore and bought a massive, heavy-duty camping cot. She walked over, opened my car door herself, and said in a voice that left absolutely no room for debate, "Get up. We are going upstairs." We climbed the 3 flights together. She marched down the hallway and pounded on our apartment door with the side of her fist, hitting it so hard I thought the wood might splinter. Mark opened the door, wearing his comfortable gray sweatpants, blinking against the harsh hallway light. "Mom? What the hell is going on?" "It's 1 a.m. Barbara didn't answer him. She threw the heavy boxed camping cot directly at his feet. It hit the floor with a massive thud. "Open it," she demanded, her voice shaking with a rage I had never heard before. "Mom, what are you doing?" "Chloe, why is she here?" Mark stammered, looking frantically between us. I said, "Open it, Mark." Barbara stepped forward, forcing him to back up into the apartment. "Starting tonight, you sleep on this cot in the hallway. You do not sleep in that bed. And you do not speak to your pregnant wife until you explain to her exactly what you've been doing with the rent money I've been sending you for the last 2 years. The entire apartment went completely, suffocatingly silent. I felt the room physically tilt. "Rent money?" I whispered, looking at Barbara. "What rent money?" "Mark pays the rent from his salary. We're saving for a house." Barbara turned to me, her eyes welling with tears, though her jaw was locked in absolute fury. "Chloe, for 2.5 years, I have been wiring $3,200 a month into a joint account Mark set up. He came to me crying shortly after your wedding, saying his salary had been cut, that Seattle rent was drowning you both, and that you were entirely broke. He begged me not to tell you because it would destroy his pride. I thought I was keeping a roof over my grandchild's head. I thought I was helping you two survive. I did the math in my head instantly. $3,200 a month for roughly 30 months. That was nearly $100,000. And I knew for an absolute fact, having seen the lease renewal document on the counter once, that our rent was only $2,100 a month. There was a massive, gaping hole in those numbers. I looked at Mark. He wasn't looking at me, or his mother. He was staring at the camping cot on the floor like he was waiting for it to swallow him whole. "I can explain," Mark finally choked out. It is a universal truth that when someone says, "I can't explain," in that specific tone of voice, they absolutely cannot. I didn't stay to listen to his explanation. I packed a single duffel bag, and Barbara drove me straight to her house. The next morning, I called my sister Sarah, told her everything, and she connected me with a ruthless family law attorney named David. David didn't just listen to my story. He brought in a forensic accountant named Elena. 2 days later, I sat in David's downtown office, while Elena laid out 3 years of Mark's financial history across a mahogany conference table like a surgeon preparing for an autopsy. "Chloe," Elena said, her voice gentle but sharp, "did you know your husband had a completely separate checking account at Pacific Northwest Credit Union?" I shook my head, feeling sick to my stomach. Elena turned her laptop around. There it was. An account opened exactly 3 years ago, just weeks after our wedding. Barbara's $3,200 monthly transfers had been going directly into this hidden account, not our joint one. From that hidden account, Mark would transfer exactly $2,100 to cover the rent, and he would quietly pocket the remaining $1,100 every single month. But that wasn't the worst part. He's been underreporting his income to you by a massive margin, Elena explained, pointing to a series of large, erratic deposits. He has been doing private, unreported freelance consulting on the side for at least 2 years. He hasn't declared a single cent of this to his employer, to the IRS, or to you. He has just over $42,000 sitting in liquid cash in this hidden account right now. Then, Elena slid another piece of paper toward me. I cross-referenced the dates of his late-night freelance logins and client emails with the timeline you gave me regarding when he started forcing you to sleep in the car. Chloe, he didn't banish you to the car because your tossing was keeping him awake. He banished you to the car because he needed you out of the apartment so he could stay up half the night working his secret freelance jobs, making phone calls, and managing this hidden money without you ever waking up and seeing his laptop screen. The realization hit me with the force of a physical blow. The 35 nights freezing in the Corolla, the numbness in my hips, the dangerous spikes in my blood pressure, the endless apologies I had offered him. He had engineered all of my physical suffering simply to maintain a quiet workspace for his secret, fraudulent side hustle. He had tortured his pregnant wife for convenience. Update 2. David filed for divorce exactly 2 weeks before my due date. In the state of Washington, filing for divorce immediately triggers an automatic financial restraining order, freezing all marital assets, including hidden accounts, the second the papers are served. Mark was served at his office on a Thursday afternoon. He came over to Barbara's house that evening, pounding on the door, looking completely unhinged. Barbara let him into the entryway but refused to let him pass the foyer. I stood at the top of the stairs, looking down at the man I thought I knew. "You froze my accounts?" Mark screamed, his face red. "You filed for divorce while you're pregnant? Are you insane? That money was for us." I was building a safety net. I was terrified of being broke, Chloe. Everything I did to protect this family. You made me sleep in a freezing car for 35 nights so you could do secret freelance work and steal your mother's money without me catching you, I said, my voice completely steady, colder than the nights I spent in that parking lot. Fear doesn't open secret bank accounts, Mark. Fear doesn't calculate exact rent discrepancies. That took planning. That took malice. You didn't protect us. You profited off my suffering. Mark didn't have an answer for that. He just stared at me, realizing his carefully constructed mask had completely dissolved. But the professional consequences of his actions were already catching up to him faster than the legal ones. As part of his upcoming VP promotion, Mark's marketing agency had run a standard, deep dive background and financial disclosure check. It was routine, but it flagged two massive issues. First, Mark had been submitting expense reimbursements for a home office stipend, inflating our rent cost to his employer to steal an extra $400 a month. Second, and much more devastatingly, his secret freelance work was uncovered. He had been consulting for a direct competitor of his own agency, a massive violation of his non-compete and conflict of interest clauses. 3 days after he was served with divorce papers, Mark was unceremoniously fired for gross misconduct. But the final, most shocking twist came a week after my daughter, Lily, was born. I was back at Barbara's house, rocking my beautiful, healthy baby girl, when there was a knock at the door. It was Julian, Mark's younger brother, and his girlfriend, Maya. Maya looked incredibly nervous. She was holding a thick manila folder. I invited them in, and Maya sat at the kitchen table across from me and Barbara. "I need to tell you both something," Maya said, her voice shaking. "Before I dated Julian, years ago, I briefly dated Mark. We were actually engaged for about 6 months. I never told anyone in the family, because it ended horribly, and when I met Julian years later, we just decided to keep the past buried. But when Julian told me what Mark did to you, Chloe, about the secret accounts, I realized he was doing it again." Maya opened the folder and pushed a stack of heavily redacted documents toward Barbara. "Mark didn't just steal from you, Barbara. He stole from his grandfather." Barbara picked up the papers, her hands trembling. It was a trust agreement. When Mark's grandfather passed away 9 years ago, he had left behind a $115,000 memorial trust fund intended to be used as a yearly scholarship for underprivileged students at the local community college. Because Mark was the eldest grandson and had a degree in finance, he was named the sole trustee. "I found out by accident when Mark and I were engaged," Maya explained, wiping a tear from her cheek. "I saw the bank statements. Mark hadn't funded a single scholarship in 5 years. He was siphoning the money out of the trust in small increments, claiming them as administrative fees and investment management costs. He was using his dead grandfather's charity fund to pay for his luxury car lease, expensive watches, and weekend trips. When I confronted him, he gaslit me, told me I was crazy, and threatened to ruin my reputation. I left him the next day. The room was so quiet you could hear the clock ticking on the wall. Mark hadn't just been stealing our rent money. He had been committing systemic fiduciary fraud for nearly a decade. The $42,000 in his secret account wasn't just freelance money. It was the last remaining dregs of his grandfather's trust fund that he was trying to hide. Barbara didn't cry. She stood up, walked over to the kitchen counter, picked up her phone, and called her own lawyer. She formally petitioned the court to audit the Walter Memorial Trust and remove Mark as trustee. The fallout was absolute and total destruction. Once the forensic accountants dug into the trust fund, They found exactly what Maya had described. Mark was facing civil litigation for fiduciary fraud and was legally ordered to pay back over $80,000 in restitution to the estate. Because he had been fired for cause, he had no income. Because our divorce froze the marital assets, he couldn't access a single dime to defend himself. The judge awarded me full primary custody of Lily, citing Mark's documented history of prioritizing his secret financial crimes over the basic physical safety of his pregnant wife. I was awarded the entirety of the $42,000 hidden account as my share of the marital assets and back-owed support. It has been 6 months since I left that freezing parking lot. I used the recovered money to secure a beautiful, sunlit 2-bedroom apartment in Ballard for me and Lily. I bought a brand new luxurious mattress, the first one I've ever owned where no one can ever tell me to leave. Mark currently lives in a tiny, depressing studio apartment above a loud laundromat. Because his reputation in the marketing industry is completely destroyed and he has a pending fraud judgment against him, the only job he could get was working the cash register at a local hardware store. He sees Lily exactly 4 hours a week, strictly supervised by Barbara at her dining room table. He looks older, exhausted, and completely defeated. Sometimes when I wake up in the middle of the night to feed Lily, I look out the window at my car parked safely in the driveway. I think about the man who made me sleep there, shivering in the dark, so he could steal from his own family in peace. I used to think the worst night of my life was the one where I sat in that freezing Corolla, but I realize now the worst part was every single apology I gave him before that night. Every time I made myself smaller to accommodate his cruelty. But I am no longer small. I am in a warm bed, my daughter is safe in my arms, and in the morning, nobody sends me a text message granting me permission to come back inside. I am already home, and I will never, ever have to ask for the keys again.